In August 1990, Iraq, under the leadership of dictator Saddam Hussein, invaded its neighbor, Kuwait. Kuwait fell quickly, and Iraq promptly annexed it. However, over the next few months, the United States, along with 38 other countries, built up forces in nearby US ally Saudi Arabia and liberated Kuwait by the end of February 1991. But why did the US defend Kuwait? Hey historians, welcome back to the Why in History. I'm your host, Alexander. Kuwait gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1961, but its history goes back a bit further than that. In 1752, Kuwait was formed, but during the mid to late 1800s, the Ottoman Empire began encroaching more and more on Kuwait's sovereignty. In 1896, the pro-Ottoman Sheikh of Kuwait at the time, Muhammad al-Sabah, was killed by his more nationalist half-brother, Mubarak. In doing so, Mubarak inherited the throne, much to the disapproval of the Ottomans, who liked having influence over Kuwait. As the Ottomans looked increasingly like they were going to attempt an annexation of Kuwait, Mubarak realized the only solution was foreign protection. In 1899, he approached the British and the two sides worked out a deal. Kuwait would become a protectorate of the UK, and in exchange, Kuwait could not cede territory without British consent or host foreign diplomats on its territory. Additionally, Britain was given more control over the Kuwaiti economy. This British protection proved very useful, as the neighboring emirate of Najd and Hassa, which was the precursor to Saudi Arabia, was very intent on annexing Kuwait. The British successfully defended Kuwait from this, but there were negative sides to the partnership too. The British wanted to keep Kuwait away from its other neighbor, Iraq, and because the newly formed Saudi Arabia was still salty from the whole failed annexation thing, Kuwait was looking increasingly isolated. This made many in Kuwait unhappy with the British, and soon, a Kuwaiti movement for the unification of Iraq and Kuwait was born. This movement, known as the Free Kuwait Movement, quickly turned violent, but the British were having none of it. They put it down with force, imprisoning or killing all of its supporters. Although the Free Kuwait Movement was destroyed in Kuwait, Iraq liked the idea. The main argument here was that before Kuwait became its own thing, it had been part of the Ottoman Vilayet of Basra, which now mostly belonged to Iraq, therefore making it rightful Iraqi territory. When the British protectorate over Kuwait ended in 1961, Iraq refused to recognize Kuwait's independence. Moreover, Iraq threatened to invade, but the rest of the Arab world pledged to defend Kuwait, forcing Iraq to back down. After a coup in Iraq, the new government finally recognized Kuwait, but claims to Kuwait continued, even after another Iraqi coup in 1968. This culminated in a border skirmish in 1973. After this, relations between Iraq and Kuwait improved, and later in the year, both countries fought alongside each other in the Yom Kippur War. Even after all this, the drama wasn't over. 1 year after Saddam Hussein became president of Iraq in 1979, Iraq invaded Iran. While the Iran-Iraq War isn't important to the context of this story, one thing is, throughout the course of the war, Iraq racked up billions of dollars of debt with Kuwait. Iraq, being a relatively poor country at the time, couldn't pay it back and instead asked Kuwait to forgive it. After Kuwait refused to forgive the debt, tensions increased. Tensions increased even further after Kuwait decided to produce more oil than allowed by OPEC, resulting in an economic loss for Iraq. Saddam Hussein, who was essentially a power-hungry dictator by this point, did the only thing a power-hungry dictator would do. He started making up reasons to invade. These ranged from false claims that Kuwait was stealing oil from Iraq to saying that Kuwait was a puppet of the United States and needed to be stopped before it was too late. Iraq began building up troops near the border, and in response, the United States, who was allied with Kuwait, put its forces in the region on high alert. Crisis appeared to have been averted when Kuwait agreed to limit its output of oil, but Saddam Hussein was still adamant that Kuwait had stolen oil from Iraqi fields and demanded a $10 billion compensation. Kuwait offered $500 million instead, but that wasn't enough to avoid Hussein's wrath. On August 2, 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. The heavily outnumbered Kuwait fell in 2 days, with most of Kuwait's army being captured or killed. In Kuwait's place, Iraq established a puppet state, but at the end of the month, Kuwait was formally annexed by Iraq. Inside the Arab world, Iraq was supported by Libya and Sudan, and while everyone else did not agree with the invasion, they were against outside military intervention. Outside the Arab world, all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council achieved something extraordinarily rare: agreement. They passed Security Council Resolution 678, which essentially told Iraq to leave by January 15, 1991, or they would be forced out. The United States was firmly against diplomacy, as they believed giving Iraq any concessions would set a dangerous precedent. Despite this, Some countries believed it was worth a shot and tried to persuade Iraq to leave, which ended in failure. After Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, Hussein started taking up grievances with the Saudis as well, as taking over Saudi Arabia would give Iraq control over an unprecedented amount of oil. The stakes of the conflict were raised. Because Iraq didn't look like it was going to back down easily, the US, authorized by the UN, started building a coalition. In the end, 39 countries agreed to intervene, and the plan was set. Most of the manpower was to be provided by the US, with Saudi Arabia, Britain, Egypt, France, Syria, and Morocco also contributing significant amounts of troops. On January 16, 1991, a day after the UN deadline, the coalition began an extensive aerial bombing campaign that severely weakened the Iraqi defenses. This ran until the 24th of February, when the ground invasion began. By this point, it was barely a contest. 4 days later, Kuwait was freed, and a ceasefire was announced. Throughout the operation, the coalition lost a grand total of 292 troops, while Iraq lost anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 troops. This means that for every person the coalition lost, Iraq lost anywhere from 68 to 171. It must be noted that about 190 of the coalition deaths were the result of either friendly fire or accidents. Since the war, Kuwait has fully recovered economically and is currently one of the world's richest countries by GDP per capita. On the other hand, Saddam Hussein's regime was toppled by a US-led invasion in 2003. These days, Iraq and Kuwait are getting along well. Kuwait is one of the leading investors in Iraq, and Iraq has recently finished paying off its war reparations to Kuwait. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want to keep seeing more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.